The word pencil comes from the Latin word penicillus, which means little tail.
Daddy wasn't fighting a bow wow. Daddy wasn't fighting a bow wow. I love my little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big bow wow 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 wow. Daddy
Hello,
wasn't
and welcome to the
fighting a
Motriverse.
bow wow.
Please do not open your test packets until you are told to do so. As you know, calculators are not allowed on this exam. And if you do not have a number 2 pencil, please raise your hand now and we will give you one. So I'm Lynette.
Yes, and I'm Skip.
And today we're not going to talk about standardized testing. So those of you in my generation can relax. It's going to be okay. Those days are behind you. Just breathe. I'm sorry if I scared everybody. It's very triggering. So today we're going to talk about pencils. Is that right, Dad?
That is absolutely correct. My inspiration for this story comes from working at an auto parts place. When I was going to school, I ended up working at this auto parts place for a while. And one day, the president of the company gathered us all together to tell us his version of the $1 million pencil story. An example of that is a shipping clerk would like a long, the original size pencil, just sharpened. And an accountant would prefer a stub of a pencil. Other workers may like in between sizes. My best recollection of his telling the story was that we were using too many pencils. That's all I can remember about it. But it sort of inspired me to do some research into pencils and how they're made.
Right.
Basically the way pencils are, I think we all are familiar with the number 2 pencil.
Mm-hmm.
The number 2 pencil is 2H. It has hard lead, which means you can draw lines or write lightly. On the other hand, if you want bolder lines, you would use a 4 or a 6. And in some cases, I think I use a 0.9 or something like that, which is usually in a mechanical pencils. The thing about pencils is that you would just think any wood would be ideal for making pencils.
Right.
But the best wood is red cedar. And the reason for that is because it doesn't splinter.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can imagine anytime you're anywhere near any kind of wood, you could get splinters. You're running your hand across something, you're going to get a splinter, but you never really think about getting splinters from a pencil, that's very good.
Yeah. From one tree, they can make 300,000 pencils.
Wow. But okay. So that sounds like a small number, doesn't it?
It seems to, it just seems like a waste of a tree, but that's.
Yeah. I guess one can only hope they're using that extra wood for other thing, maybe paper. Well, what would you use cedar for? I guess you're using cedar for lots of other things.
Yeah, I don't think you use cedar for paper because cedar would be
building materials.
Well, yeah, it's also because it's rare, comparatively rare to like pine or I think mostly pine is used for paper. And I don't know for sure on that one. It's an interesting question.
I guess we'll do an episode about paper.
Yeah, we could do that. One of the misconceptions that we all have is, you always hear about you get enough lead in your pencil and stuff like that.
Right.
The material is actually a mix of graphite and clay.
Okay.
It's not really lead.
Yes.
Pencil can be sharpened 17 times. You can draw a line 35 miles long and write 45,000 words. How about that for a little bit of trivia?
Yeah, I feel like I've done that with.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I've written 45,000 words.
Pencils are, used in a lot of our culture. Pencils were before the advent of pens. Pencils were used all the time. Johnny Carson had a pencil. If you've ever seen Johnny Carson's show, and maybe
Yes.
for the younger folks, you probably didn't, unless you saw it in reruns. He regularly had a pencil on his desk, and he was always tapping it. To avoid accidents on the set, what they did is they had an eraser on both ends. So it really wasn't a writing pencil.
Okay. So I really love the part about Johnny Carson needing a safety pencil for his show mostly because he Johnny Carson had such a revered reputation, right? And he was viewed as this great guy for years. He was in everybody's living rooms and everybody knew who he was, and he was talking to all of them. And it kind of only came out sort of much later, probably even after his death, like how he was actually kind of horrible and mean. And
Yes.
he was like not really nice to anybody. He's really abusive to Ed McMahon in particular. But I just think it's kind of funny, the idea of him being given a pencil with two erasers because he can't be trusted with a pointy object for his own safety and others. I really like
that's
that.
kind of funny to think about. Yeah. Johnny Carson. Yes. Yes. The pencil is pretty versatile. It can be used underwater and upside down.
Right.
However, it can't be used in space.
Oh, wait a second.
And
I know a lot of stories about this.
Yeah. The reason for that is the graphite would break off and cause damage to spacecraft and astronauts. One thing about graphite's not the best conductor, but it is a conductor. There was a thing we talk about, the $1 million pencil. It's actually a $1 million pen, which is
right.
Crazy. A special pen is used in space for writing, there's all kinds of stories about that. And one of the last story that I had looked at said that you can actually use a regular pen.
Right. Yes, I've heard that. I've heard the joke about like how NASA spent millions of dollars developing a special pen to be used in space.
Yep.
And like the Russians were like, we use pencil, but like that is kind of just a joke. And it's funny you say that they don't use pencils in space, because they actually do use pencils in space, and they still do use them in space. But number one, they use modified formulas in the pencils because of that breaking off problem, the dust problem, and the graphite getting into the instruments problem. So they use like they don't use like number 2 pencils. They'll use like different ones, maybe softer, differently formulated. And I'm sure they spent lots and lots of money on special formulations to make sure that it's the right kind of pencil for space. But they use pens and pencils in space, which kind of makes me laugh, because you hear that story. Everybody at a dinner party who's trying to be the smartest person in the room is going to tell you that NASA space pen pencil story. And you can totally one up them by being, well, actually, they do use them, and they use both, and they use everything. And so nothing is right. I love it.
Yeah. There's a interesting history about pencils. In the 1800s, Germany was the leading producer of pencils.
Right.
The Faber company, the Faber family was the family that was the biggest producer. They had factories in Germany. And for generations, they made pencils.
Which I think they still do, don't they?
They still do. Faber
Castell. Yeah, they make a lot of art supplies.
Yep. Around 1814, the son, John Faber, immigrated to the U.S. and opened a store in New York City. And his mission was to find and export splinter-free wood for the family factories in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
His mission, obviously, was to find new sources of cedar.
Right.
He made his way, basically what he did is he made his way down south and depleted many of the cedar forests in his quest for the cedar wood. He ended up eventually arriving in Cedar Key, Florida.
Aha, Florida makes an appearance.
That's right. And that's where cedar trees were abundant. Cedar Key is about 50-minute drive from Denellen. Denellen's probably, anybody who's from other parts of the country don't know what Denellen is, but Denellen's about roughly an hour and a half from Orlando, which is, and also about the same distance from Tampa.
Okay. I was going to say, isn't everything like an hour and a half from Orlando?
Yes, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. And while, he discovered a vast red cedar forest, and he bought the thousands of acres of land and all the timber rights. He brought in crews, cut down the trees and logs, and shipped them to the factories in Germany. At the time, one of the things I didn't note here was that how they used to ship them, it was really pretty intense. They would go up to the rivers that ran from Cedar Key through the center of Florida to the coast, where they would put them on boats and ship them over to Germany. So these were very large logs would ship.
Hmm.
So to make it more efficient and in order to be able to make it easier to move the lumber, he built a log slat mill, which basically would mill down the cedar trees into smaller sizes, so they'd be easier to transport.
Right. Okay.
It ended up being easier, more cost efficient, and and all the while they were shipping it over through the water to the coast, which still was pretty intense, because I think the waterway through the intercoastal waterway is a winding type of river.
It is, and it can be pretty narrow in parts. I mean, the intercoastal, it runs through where I live, and it's not super wide here.
No.
So I can imagine in different parts of the state, it's like that would be kind of hard to do if you've got these big, sort of things of lumber.
Yeah, and at different times of the year in Florida, you have the quote unquote dry season, and the levels of the water would be low, and then you have the summer or the rainy season, and then you got just the opposite, that the rivers are always high. A helpful thing that happened for them was the Trans-Florida Railroad was completed in about 1861, and connected the West Coast with Cedar Key, and the West Coast, Cedar Key, to the East Coast. The cost savings by shipping the rail enabled Farber. They built a pencil factory in New York and supply with slats from Cedar Key, so it made life a lot easier.
Right, because it cut down on the costs of shipping it all the way to New York, so that you could facilitate having a factory.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then the Civil War happened.
Mm-hmm. That's always the way. That's always the way.
That's always the way. Just when you got to success, and the Union Army, and to cut off the supply lines for the Confederates, destroyed railroads, and so that made it obviously more difficult to ship. And he ended up building another factory besides the slat factory. He built a pencil casing factory, which again was another way of cost savings. The pencil casings would be smaller, and actually have it to the point where it's just assemble it. And then Cedar Key just went absolutely nuts in terms of population, because a lot of jobs, they'd have the mills there,
which would bring the workers and their families, and then you've got to have businesses to support those families, which then would turn into more people coming in, bringing in money and products, and then there you go. That's how these towns are born. And the railroads can facilitate that to an extent, but if the railroads are disabled due to war, that could be tough. Be really tough.
Yeah, and that's just what happened. And they at the time they would a third of a million pencil casings were produced there. But as is always the case, all things come to an end.
Yes, they do.
And it's something that nowadays there's more thoughts in terms of controlling the production of lumber, of when they do reforesting, and which they weren't doing that at all. And so they didn't replant a lot of the forest, and they actually depleted a lot of the area. And the cedar, the other thing about trees is that they provide a protection. In September of 1896, there was a storm, a hurricane, winds over 125 miles an hour, which would be a Cat 5. And they had a 10-foot storm surge. When you think in perspective, if you think about a 6-foot storm surge, you think, well, 6 foot, what's that? Well, 6 feet is taller than your car.
Right.
Basically it wipes out everything at 6 feet. So 10 feet is catastrophic.
Oh, sure. And if the tree line isn't there anymore.
Right. And so everything gets swept away. They ended up having, by the way, I remember you talked earlier, Farber wasn't the only producer of pencils. There was also Eagle Company. So they ended up abandoning Cedar Key, and then there was a fire in the remaining buildings. Cedar Key ceased to exist.
Wow. That's kind of crazy. Before Cedar Key became big, like you said, and before the Germans before the Faber came into the country and started making all of his money and having a big market in pencils. While I was doing a little bit of research on your research, I found something really interesting that I didn't know was that Henry David Thoreau had a hand in the pencil industry.
Really? How
Yeah.
so?
Yeah. So his father had a friend he was part of a team who had discovered a large deposit of granite in New Hampshire.
Oh, the granite state. Yep.
In the Granite State, yes. And his father was John Thoreau. He started a business getting this granite, and they actually did start a pencil business. John Thoreau and his friend, they were like the biggest pencil business in America for quite a while. And Henry David Thoreau, who had, he went to Harvard, but then he came back and joined the family business for a while. He was a guy who had his hand in a lot of things. Apparently, he's very interesting to read about if you ever get a chance. He did spiritualism. He did all kinds of other crazy stuff besides just writing, books. But Henry David Thoreau was the one who actually developed the really good mix of graphite and clay, because a lot of the stuff they were mixing the graphite with was like fats and stuff. They were trying to mix the graphite with something so that it wasn't just graphite. And he decided that clay was a really good mix because, of course, I'm sure there's plenty of clay in the soil in New England, which we know because we built a house there.
Right.
And so he mixed the clay with the granite and water and kiln firing it to make it a much more stable pencil lead, which I was like, wait, Henry David Thoreau? That's amazing. Yeah. And he had a really good business until Faber, or however you want to pronounce it, came in and, leveled all the trees in Florida.
Okay. So they take away their source,
Yeah, right. Which, I mean, also knowing what I know about Thoreau, probably wouldn't have liked all the deforestation part of it. He was a nature guy. So really interesting to learn about. And I'm definitely going to be doing some more reading about that because I never knew that they were America's leading pencil maker, the Thoreau Company.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting.
It is interesting. One of the things that it's interesting we talk about the pencils, and I didn't really put it in here about how you make a pencil.
Right.
Okay. Basically, you cut thin strips of wood, and then you route the wood using a V-groove bit, and then you make up the drawing, the leads, quote unquote, into the diameter that you need, and then you put it in the groove. You glue it, clamp it, cut it down to size, and cut it to length, and then you sand it. And a lot of times you see the yellow pencils, a lot of times it's painted,
Right.
So that's how a pencil's made. Okay, now you can sleep better knowing that.
Right, exactly. See, all you people wanted to know how to make pencils. And also, like, an interesting question is, why are pencils usually yellow?
Good question. Okay.
So, I mean, there's a couple of debates. Part of it, and this is not a joke, part of it has to do with the sources of graphite being from China. And actually the color yellow in China is associated with royalty and respect. And apparently American pencil manufacturers began painting their pencils bright yellow to communicate the regal feeling and the association with China.
Well.
Right. So they're
Yeah.
also to sort of communicate the geographical origins, basically sort of saying these are like a Chinese product. And I mean, it's interesting. I mean, some people are just like, nah, they're just yellow so that they're easier to see and harder to lose. That was somebody else on the internet who was just being a wise ass. But also, why are they hexagonal instead of round? Which I think is an easier answer. It's just so they don't roll off the desk.
Yeah, I mean, I think the earlier pencils were flat,
Right, like you would find at Home Depot, like the construction pencils are like
Yes,
flat.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's how the earlier ones, so obviously those wouldn't roll off a table.
And also, don't they still make them that way so that they're easier to sharpen? Because you would just sharpen that with a knife. You wouldn't have like a
Yeah,
pencil sharpener to
right.
sharpen that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The quote unquote lead, if you will, is the thicker. It's probably the thicker, like a 6 or an 8, something like that.
Yeah, do
Yeah.
we know about the distinction between the different numbers? Is that mostly just like the different grades of like softness of the lead?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The 6s and the 8s are softer leads, so, maybe if you were doing drawing with pencils, you would use a softer lead.
Hmm. And then, of course, the other really interesting part is why is it that you could get stabbed with lots of things in your life. You can get splinters with lots of things in your life. But why is it that if you got stabbed with a pencil, which like most people have in their youth, you and myself included, why do you now have a blue tattoo somewhere on your skin from your pencil?
From your pencil, yeah. The graphite in the pencil.
It does.
So,
Yeah. It does the same thing a tattoo does. If it penetrates just the right layer of skin. So when you get a tattoo, it's not just like they're not just drawing it on your skin, obviously. They are using a needle to puncture to a specific layer in the dermis, right? The thick layer of the visible skin on the outside is the epidermis. If you were to just do a tattoo just on the epidermis, it wouldn't take. After a while, it would just fade and be gone. But if you go into the dermis, it'll stay permanently, or at least semi-permanently.
Right.
And so if you are stabbed with a pencil and the graphite, any amount of that graphite breaks off and gets into the dermis, that's when you'll have your little blue pencil tattoo that I have, and that you have, and lots of people I think have.
Yep. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Just speaks to the violence in our schools, over the years, because it always happened at school. I don't know about yours.
Of course. Yeah.
I got stabbed by somebody at school, and that's how I got my tattoo.
Yeah, I don't even remember, but it probably was,
and yours is in your head. Like, what were they doing in your school?
Well, probably in school we were using ink, so we would have ink wells. Mm-hmm. And one of the favorite things of a boy to do is to dip some girl's hair in the inkwell.
Oh, like Anne of Green Gables. Isn't that cute?
So I wouldn't say I did that, but it's entirely possible. And that was the retribution I got for it. I don't remember specifically, but I was such a wise ass anyway, so it probably was.
That's interesting. Well, it doesn't exactly sound like you now, so that's good.
Oh, no,
I guess you've improved.
Yeah. Well, aged. Yeah.
And if you do, you deserve to get stabbed with a pencil, apparently.
Yeah. Well, the theory behind that is if you're picking on somebody or you do something to somebody, it's because you like them, at least when you're a kid. So.
Oh, such a tough. Yeah, but nowadays that's actually taught out of children, thankfully.
Exactly. Thankfully.
Yeah, we don't want. Yeah, because what happens is you get that feeling like if he's mean to you, it means he likes you, and you can imagine how that would turn into a lot of toxic relationships continuing way too long.
Yep.
Yes, and how like there's this thing called negging as a dating technique that guys use, where they purposely will insult a girl in order to attract them more, and it like works. You just make negative comments about their appearance usually, and the girls are just like, I don't know, I don't know why it works. I'm sad that it works.
Yeah, me too. That seems opposite of what you'd want to do. So.
Yeah, but guys will do it all the time. Like, oh, your hair is terrible. They're like, oh well, I'll change it for you. It's okay. But you don't know what he's like. You don't know what he's like. He's so nice when nobody else is around.
Where have I heard that before?
From me. Oh, well.
The research I was doing, the combination, the grading of the pencils.
Yes.
2 HB is basically the most common pencil. You always see it with tests and stuff. They require you to have a 2. And the reason for that is the HB, H stands for hardness, B stands for black. And basically we see a B. B is a softer material, which is has less clay in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the 2, the 2 again, that's the optimum mix between hardness and softness. And that's why it works so well. When you go with the B and the higher numbers, you have more smudging that goes on. And the most artists will use a B type pencil. Mostly could do for shading and stuff like that. And it's a softer material. It tends to lend itself better. The really interesting thing is the hardness, and we wouldn't think about this because we're not. I wouldn't think about it because I'm not an artist. Is that the harder lead actually puts grooves in the paper?
Oh yeah, that would make a big difference.
Right, which is harder to fill. So that's why you'd want to have a softer material.
Well, and especially if you're doing drawings, and if you're doing anatomical drawings, I did a very small amount of art, but my daughter does a lot of art. And we talked about this, like, even when you're just starting out, if you're doing like a hand, for instance, you're going to draw the bones first, or something resembling the bones, even if you're just doing lines, and you're going to erase those. And so if your pencil is leaving grooves, that's going to mess everything up on your drawing. You're going to see those grooves. Yeah.
And it's definitely, it's one thing to erase the material, but it's another thing, like you say, if it puts a groove in the paper. That's interesting. I think, and to further elaborate, is that the way they make the graphite, the pencil, is a combination of graphite, clay, and water, and they make a paste, and they put it into a mold, and they mold it to come up with the material that goes in the center of the pencil.
Is it still fired in a kiln or heated?
Yeah, it's just fired. Yeah. And in the slats, basically the slats are like kiln dried, and they're thin pieces of material. Let's say for the argument, it could be 6 inches wide, and they would have multiple grooves in it to put the lead in. And then it's glued together, compressed, and then they slice out the pencils. And that's really why you have octagonal.
Oh, because it's easier in the manufacturing process. Right. Yeah. So, it's also just the added bonus of it not rolling off the table. But it makes more sense to do things in angles when you're manufacturing multiples in a line than to have to sort of, make a circle for everything. Good. The number 2 aspect with standardized testing, just without looking anything up, I would guess that they decided with much trial and error that besides the smudging factor, the number 2 lead is easier to pick up on whatever technology they're using to read the standardized test bubbles, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's the number 2 HB in the hardness and the black. It's a combination of it's hard and soft, so it's like in the middle. So it doesn't smudge, but it definitely leaves a mark that's dark enough to be picked up.
And it wouldn't be like a false positive type of thing in a standardized test or a voting machine or whatever else you're using.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yep. And they were so strict about it. Like, I remember when I was a kid, other pencils were coming out, like we had those stupid little, not mechanical, but they were those little segmented pencils that had like a little cheap pencil lead on a little piece of plastic. And there were like 10 of them inside the pencil. Yeah. We weren't allowed to use those for tests because they were just crap. And we always thought that the teachers were being unreasonable and just being like mean and stuff. And you also, because you couldn't have a calculator, no calculators. And it was funny too, because like I've definitely talked about this with my peers quite a few times. And I've talked about this with customers quite a few times when they say like, they kept telling us all through elementary school and all through high school, you can't have this calculator because, you're not going to have a calculator on you all the time when you're an adult. And we're all like, ha, Little did you know, we all have full-size computers on us all the time. We all have
Yeah.
calculators. We have calendars and everything.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, you're right. And then you get into high school nowadays and college back then, where they say to you, "This is what you required. You had to have a calculator for the class." You
Yeah.
know? And now it's, you see them they'll have laptops at their desks, and even more sophisticated, they would have tablets. The other thing that's interesting is about the pencils is, like, I think in the early days they focused more on the red cedar because it was a harder material, but it would also the less splintering. But nowadays, pencils are made out of many different materials. They make them out of poplar, basswood, incense cedar. Incense cedar was interesting because incense cedar, one of the things about incense cedar is actually used a lot now, is that when you're sharpening the pencil, it gives off a pleasant odor. How about that one?
That is nice.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
Cedar trees are big, right? So that would be another plus.
Yep.
It's better to use an enormous tree to make your pencils than to like cut down a bunch of smaller trees.
Exactly. And I think that the more expensive, like the red cedar is more expensive because it's rare. And pine, obviously, pine's very cheap. And then spruce. More often than not, in the finer pencils nowadays, they'll use the red cedar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I've heard about spruce in pencils. That feels like I don't know where I would have learned that except if they printed it on the pencil. Cause you've seen like pencils will say things on them, they just sort of declaring what they're made of or declaring, right next to the number or something. They would say like spruce and be like, ooh, fancy spruce. Yeah, I know what spruce is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Get a bit of marketing ploy. Who knows?
What I find also interesting is that the manufacturing of pencils, it seems like a pretty simple product, but they can be like 20 or as much as 50 steps into making that pencil.
Oh, yeah. I mean, have you ever, I don't know if you ever were interested in this, but my love of this kind of television or, media absorption, it started with Sesame Street. But then it became a whole show, which was so great. They used to do this little thing on Sesame Street where they were in a factory and they just showed you how they made pencils or whatever. And you got to see the machines, those really cool, fast moving machines where all the little different parts. And they show you how to make potato chips and stuff. It was always fascinating to watch. And then later, of course, which is still, I think it's still running. There was a Canadian show called How It's Made. And we were watching that at night, just about every night to kind of fall asleep. You just be like, oh, what are they making on How It's Made now? And it was funny because we were watching it for months and months because it was just like, just comfort television. It's like watching Bob Ross or whatever. And it took me like 6 months to go, this show feels really Canadian because like after a while in the later seasons, every episode was either how they make hockey pucks or how they make hockey sticks or how they make other hockey things. And I'm like, wait, and I looked it up and it's like, yeah, this is a Canadian show. They're like ran out of stuff. And they're like, let's show them how we make all the hockey stuff. Like every episode is about hockey stuff.
That's the hint. Good. When I was younger as a Cub Scouts, I think I told you about this, was that, we used to go on trips to different manufacturing plants to see how things were made. We went to Wise Potato Chip Factory to see how potato chips were made. We went to the Hood Milk Plant, which you see how they process milk and ice cream. And I know I've told you the story, and I've told other people the stories. One memory I had of going to that Hood plant was that they had bubblers. One had white milk and the other had chocolate milk. I'm sure that it's not too practical nowadays, but I do remember that.
And I've told that story to so many people, and the first thing they say is, what's a bubbler? Because they're not from Massachusetts or Michigan. Yeah. And the second thing they say is, ew, like Because if you think about it, it seems like the coolest concept when you first, oh man, the bubblers have milk in them. And they're like, oh wow, bubblers with chocolate milk. And then they think, oh, that's so gross. Like after 20 minutes, it would be dirty. And like, how do you clean out the tubing and all the various mechanisms to,
absolutely.
Oh God. And they probably didn't. It's kind of like if you try, you should probably not think about fountain soda at restaurants too much because like, if you're like 17, you're probably not cleaning that very often as part of your work routine. And also you probably hate your job and like all of that other stuff. And I know I used to do a lot of cleaning when I worked for McDonald's, not a sponsor. But I don't remember ever cleaning the fountain caps for the fountain soda.
Yeah, when I was overseas in Vietnam, we had bubblers.
That's water
barracks.
Fountains for everybody not in Massachusetts or Michigan. By the way.
And it would be like what you see nowadays where someone gets a 5-gallon jug of water and they put it on top of a box when you take the water out of that. But I never drank that water because it was yellow or orange or something, and I said, I look at that and says, no, that doesn't look good.
Well, they just take it out of like the Yangtze River or something and just
I
put
hope
it
not.
into
I don't think they did, but it's not the same kind of thing we would be used to in the United States, which really, really speaks to our being so spoiled by how things are processed, so or what we expect to see in certain products.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's not a value judgment, by the way, on any other country, because
no,
not at all. But yeah, I'm sure, and especially back in the time when you were there, and all the conflict that was going on, and all the infrastructure problems that were happening, and all of the uprisings and all of that stuff that was happening, I'm sure it was really difficult to have resources.
Well, it's the classic when you're in a foreign country, don't drink the water. So
I know. And that's really not, and just to be clear, that's really more it's more of an us than them thing, because Richard and I talked about this. We talk about sometimes where we'd like to travel. And I always say, like, he wants to go certain places to go surfing. And the first thing I ask is like, am I going to get sick? Because not because other places are gross, not because other places are dirty, but because my whole microbiome is used to where I'm living now, and I'm getting older, and pretty much everything upsets my stomach if it's any different than what I have. And so like, I'm just scared to go anywhere because of that. But I'm really sad because I want to absorb culture of different places, and I want to like see the beauty of different places. But I'm like, oh gosh, like I'll just drink Coke.
Yeah. Well, that's why they say to drink the bottled water. It's interesting. Lately I've been seeing a lot of on Facebook, a lot of cartoons referencing military soldiers. And there was one particular one you just think flashed from my mind when you were talking about the water, was this guy is in his yard drinking water out of the hose. And his wife says, oh, that's gross. And then his mind flashes back to when he was in Vietnam drinking water out of the ponds,
Yeah, right. Well, and of course, drinking water out of the hose. Lately on social media, there's been this big resurgence of like Gen X just stuff, right? There's like this Gen X pride happening because it's like, okay, millennials, like you got your chance to talk about how your life is. We're going to talk about Gen X for a while. And so all over my Facebook, there's some good stuff, like, haha, kids don't know what cassette tapes are. All that's good stuff. But like everybody's writing, I drank out of the garden hose. And yeah, like I totally did drink out of the garden hose because I wasn't allowed to go inside while it was still light out and I was thirsty. That was my source of water because like your parents didn't want you around when you were Gen X. Like you weren't supposed to hang out with your parents. They were cleaning the house or doing whatever it was inside if they weren't at work. And so don't come in here with your dirty feet and track all kinds of mud into my kitchen. Drink out of the garden hose if you're thirsty. What's the matter with you?
Yeah, and the which also brings to mind is like the sweetest tasting water I ever had was out of a well. And I mean, sweetest, I don't know if sweet is the right word, but the best tasting.
Right.
Yet and all nowadays, all they talk about is hardness of the water coming out of wells and all the chemicals that are in the water coming out of wells. Yeah, it's just amazing. I guess not to say that I don't that I disagree with what they're saying. It's just that's my memory of drinking out of water straight out of a well.
Oh,
So,
sure. And we had well water for quite a while when we lived in Rowley, but then we also had city water,
mhm.
which like Salem, I kind of liked the water in Salem. And actually in the restaurants, people think I'm weird here. Like, and Richard gave me some looks, but I told him I kind of like it when the water's a little bleachy. You go to a restaurant and the water tastes a little bit chlorini.
Mhm.
It's oh, that's good. Oh, it's a little bit bleachy. I kind of like that. It's because we're in the city.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I like our little divergent that we did. But yeah, so and then I did a little bit of research on Cedar Key. Cedar Key was interesting. It had a lot of different historical sort of features. There a lot of storms hit it, but I guess now it's a wildlife sanctuary because of what happened after they kind of cut all the trees down
Mhm.
and after they stopped using it for trees. And then, that big hurricane hit, they tried to start an industry. Actually, I think it was Hoover tried to start an industry of oysters, like oyster farming. They kind of took all the oysters really quickly. It's very funny when you read an article about it. It's like, oystering had become the major industry, but in 1909 the oyster beds were exhausted. So they
Not
tried that for a
surprising.
while.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because they like, oh yeah, oysters. So Herbert Hoover, he established the Cedar Keys National Wildlife Refuge. And so what he did was he named 3 of the islands as a breeding ground for certain birds. And so it became a big thing about birds and fish. And I guess there's still the Marine Biology Research Center for the University of Florida in Gainesville, because that's sort of the same area, the Gainesville area is there in Cedar Key, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of tourism because they kept some of the buildings from the old fishing village. There's a lot of like little local museums. There's an exhibit that displays a reproduction of one of the first air conditioning installations, which they had used in Cedar Key for malaria patients, which I thought was interesting. Yeah. So you think of air conditioning, that was probably like the 1800s or early 1900s when they installed air conditioning like in a building. There was a naturalist sort of like almost circling back around to Thoreau, but this was a different guy, John Muir. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Muir. Is that Muir?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
He, I guess famously, I didn't know about it, walked 1,000 miles from Louisville, Kentucky to Cedar Key in 2 months in 1867. And so Cedar Key is very proud of that. They have like, he was here and he did that
He was
thing,
here, yeah.
Yeah. And he wrote a memoir called 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf, which he published in 1916. And he talked about Cedar Key because while he was there, I guess he worked in a sawmill and he contracted malaria. And maybe he was able to have some nice AC during that time. But he recovered enough to sail to Cuba. And then I guess he might have lived there, but he published that book. It was published after his death. So I thought that was interesting that this little town, I always find it interesting that little towns have so much sort of diverse history. How it's like, it used to be this and then it became that. And it was like a whole story just in this little place you'd never really heard of. And also pencils. I love that.
Right. Yeah. I think over the years it reinvented itself, basically showing their resilience to come back from hurricanes or other events, whether it's economy or natural disasters. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually on the National Register of Historic Places, parts of Cedar Key, which is nice, because of the state parks and everything that are there. There's a lot of sort of tourism stuff that if you just do a quick search, you can find things to do in Cedar Key and a lot of cute little neighborhoods to look at, a lot of cute little buildings. I know it was involved in the Civil War. So I did not dive into that part of its history. I can imagine it has some dark stuff too.
Yep.
Especially because it was an area not just for the pencils, but for other things, because of the railroad and because of, probably the intercoastal waterway. There was a lot of shipping that went through there. So you can imagine, just even without looking it up, that there was some dark stuff there. There was probably some slavery there. There was probably some bad working condition type things there. But, I still find it interesting to look at history of places. I did not grow up in a place where I had to be careful looking up history as much because I grew up in the North. But, sometimes when you look at the South stuff, there are some interesting things in and among the dark things. So it was interesting to look at. And, of course, in Salem, we do have that whole embarrassing witch thing.
Yeah.
Where we did that stupid thing. And it wasn't me, I realized, but
Yeah.
our settlers thought it was a really good idea to persecute women and one guy just because they were, I don't know, different, loud, not Puritans, whatever reason. The poor old lady who lived down the way in Danvers, let's call her a witch too. So yeah, there's dark crap in all of history, but
Sure, there is. Yeah.
Yeah, but we still have pencils.
Yeah, we still have pencils, if nothing else. And they still manufacture them, and they're used probably more, more in the with artists, but it's not just artists. It's still used for writing in a lot of places. I find I use my pencil a lot. I have a mechanical pencil, but I certainly use it a lot.
I own pencils, but I can't tell you the last time I used a pencil that wasn't for art purposes.
Yeah. Our final thought is, until the advent of mechanical pencils, back to the original start, different jobs in the company preferred pencils of different lengths. Nowadays, most people use computers, tablets, or phones to complete their tasks. Who knows where we'll be in the future as technology develops. However, there'll be some of us that will still use pencils. The thing about the future is something we always discuss in terms of digressing a little bit, where we are with electronics. And nowadays, it's challenging to keep up with it. And where is it going to be as AI progresses, or the technology progresses in the future?
Right.
So that's a topic for another time and place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Okay.
I think we've exhausted the Cedar Key and the pencil industry, folks. I guess that just leaves one thing to do.
Oh my God, here we go again. Oh.
Yes, it's time to groan, folks.
Humanity. What invention allows us to see through walls?
What?
Windows.
Oh my God. Okay.
I know a bunch of good jokes about umbrellas, but they usually go over people's heads. The bank keep calling me to give me compliments. They say I have an outstanding balance.
Oh, good for you. I'm like, these jokes. I'm like sitting here with my hand over my face.
Yeah, I believe it. Hey, and hey, how about barbers? You just have to take the hats off to them.
Oh my God. Thought it was going to be a darker barber joke, but okay.
That's true. Yeah. What did one plate say to the other plate?
What's that?
Tonight, dinner's on me.
Oh no.
Did you hear about the surgeon who enjoyed performing quick surgeries on insects?
No.
No, he did one on the fly. What is a vampire's favorite chip?
I don't know.
A blood vessel.
Oh no.
What do you get from a pampered cow?
Oh.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Spoiled milk.
Spoiled milk. Yep. Okay.
There is only one thing that I can't deal with.
Okay.
That's a deck of cards that are glued together.
Okay. That's good. I think we should end on that one because that just reminds me. Yeah. I have had enough, but I need to say something about the deck of cards thing. Okay. I know you remember.
Mhm.
And some people who are listening may remember. But if they don't remember, they get to hear a really good story about my father's special relationship to dealing cards as regards to my family. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mother's side of the family, we would have like get-togethers. My mother's side of the family, we were really fond of playing games as a relaxation after dinner or whatever. And it turns out my dad just like really likes to play cards, so he's good at cards. But there were some disagreements, Dad. Is that correct about your techniques?
Yes. Instead of dealing around the table, left to right, I would deal alternate. And what that means is I deal one to the left, one to the right, one to the left in the middle, one to the right in the middle, and one to the center. And it came out just the same. It was actually more random, I felt, anyways. But boy, I'll tell you, that sent the table into an eruption.
And so. I can imagine particular people at that table into an eruption. No, that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're doing it wrong. Don't do it that way. Yeah. Because they took that stuff really seriously. Like, yes, we like to play games. Mm-hmm. And it was relaxing for us, but it was also like really serious. Like, like my grandmother was the skip-bo champion and nobody ever beat her except for me once. Nobody else ever beat her at skip-bo. But that's and what's funny is that into adulthood, no matter what, whenever your name was brought up, your dad, how's he doing? He never really is good at dealing cards, but I like him.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to deal cards though. He doesn't do it right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, I'll tell you, that was a biggie. There was another incident which you didn't know about, but we used to on Saturday nights there was a show that you could call in and request songs, and so we would call in to request a song, and a lot of times you're on hold. And when the guy finally came on, we had found out that we were short a few cards, and he says, "Oh, so you're not dealing with a full deck of cards?
See?
You're not dealing with a full deck? Okay,
that's right."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you laugh about that, but you don't even realize, you feel a little naive. You said, yeah, we just didn't, for some reason, we didn't have a full deck.
Oh my God. Well, folks, we did this. I think we bashed it in the head. So please send us a message if you happen to go on our podcast through Buzzsprout, through the link we sent you, or through, if you had those QR codes on the business cards. Leave us a comment. We really love it. We did get one comment so far from my cousin, and I was very delighted to get it. Leave us an email if you like at mochiverse@gmail.com. That's MOCCIAVERSE@gmail.com. Suggestions for future episodes. You can tell us if you like the show. You can just say hi. And I hope that you keep listening. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And I guess bye.
That's it.
That's it. Bye.
Bye for now.
Daddy wasn't finding a pow wow. Daddy wasn't finding a pow wow. I've got a little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big pow wow.
Well, listen, if somebody wants to stick a pencil in their eye, far be it from me to stop them. Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, freaking Johnny Carson. I was just listening to a whole, well, I'll save it for the show.
Okay.